Over the last few months, as I've been working with various buyers, one of the things that I've been reminded of and re-reminded of again and again is the fears that, or are the fears that buyers have when it comes to purchasing a property, especially when it's their first property and they're just new into the process of buying a house. And as I was rediscovering or being re-reminded of it, I thought that I should make a video about it, a video for the buyers to help them understand that the fears that they have are normal and that this is something that happens with everybody. And also maybe through this video to give some solutions and the understanding of fears, so the fears are not so horrible and big and they don't stop you from buying a house. So what are those fears? I realized that there are four fears that home buyers have. The fear of buying a house, the fear of buying the wrong house or making a mistake buying a house, the fear of paying too much, and the fear of the salespeople. So let's go one by one so we can work through them. The first one, the fear of buying a house. The fear of buying a house is normal because it's a big thing. It's a lot of money. It's a massive commitment, probably for the rest of our lives. So it's scary. It is something that we have not done before. We have not committed usually for something that big, except for maybe a car or a stereo system when we were young. So this fear of spending so much money on a property is scary. And I want to change the way that you look at this for a second, because there are a few things to consider. The first one is the commitment. The commitment is something that buyers do regardless of whether they buy a house or not. If you're not buying a house, you're renting, which is exactly the same commitment. It is paying ongoing money for a property that we are staying in. So it's the same thing. The difference is we might think the fact that if we rent a house, then we can live and there's no commitment. Well, it's not exactly like this, because if you rent a house and you live, you will need to buy, you will need to rent somewhere else unless you move back to living with your parents. So the commitment is still there. And therefore, the commitment is the same commitment. The second fear that comes under buying a house is the amount of money. How do I pay so much money? And I want to make you think about this. If you couldn't afford to buy a house, the bank will not lend you money. So the fact that it is such a big amount of money and the bank is willing to pay you, to give you the money to buy a house, means that the bank trusts you, that you can pay that much money on a house, for a house on a regular basis. So it is more or less the same as renting a house. Obviously, the amounts are a little bit bigger, but usually the difference right now in this market between renting and buying, depending on what we do, is maybe a couple of $100. But there are ways to mitigate that, whether it's getting a flatmate or a couple of flatmates, or doing a few changes in our lifestyle that enable us to purchase a property. So don't think about that as a commitment that you have never done before. It is exactly the same as purchasing or as renting a property. Similar commitment. The only difference is when you rent a house, tomorrow the landlord can give you notice and you have a few months to get out. And when you buy a house, it's yours. Nobody can kick you out. Fear number two is the fear of buying the wrong house, or buying a lemon, a house that has got a lot of things wrong with them. Point number one with this fear: there's always something wrong with houses. Something will always break down. There will never be a perfect house. A house is like a car. It needs maintenance. It needs things doing to it. There will be some things, even with brand new houses, that will need to be fixed. So there is always going to be something that needs maintenance. And the second part, if you have done your research about various types of property, if in your process of purchasing a house, you employ the building inspector to check through the house, if you consulted with people who understand structures and have spoken to your real estate agent, then really there shouldn't be anything majorly wrong with the property. So do your research, take your time to understand the different structures, to understand what things can go wrong and what you need to look for in properties. And by doing that, you will make sure that you are not buying a lemon, you are not buying a house that will then, after you buy, completely fall down and you are left with a massive mortgage that you can't pay because the house is no longer there. So this is something that I have never had anybody happening to, and I don't think will happen to you if you do the research and you check what's happening. Fear number 3, the fear of paying too much. Well, let's say this. If you're buying a house, you paid too much. And the reason I'm saying that is that if you paid a certain amount of money for a house, you are the person who was willing to pay more than anybody else for that property. Buying a house is not like going to the supermarket and buying a 1 kg of tomatoes where you would pay the same for the kg. Houses are different and prices are different. And the fact that you buy means that you are willing to pay more than anybody else. Sometimes the willing to pay more than anybody else is $1,000. Sometimes it is $10,000. But unless you are looking at buying a house and then immediately selling it onwards, if you're looking at staying in that house for many, many years, whether you paid $1,000 more than the other person or $10,000 more than the other person, over time, this gets balanced and it doesn't really matter. So that fear of paying too much is a fear that really you shouldn't worry about that much. And again, if you do your research, if you choose specific suburbs that you want to live in, and you research, you know what is selling in those areas, you know prices, you understand the marketplace in that specific area, then there is no reason why you should pay too much for a house. Obviously, if you are looking everywhere in Auckland, you're going to get so confused that you might end up paying too much because you will be comparing a Mount Eden house with a Papatoetoe house or a Remuera house with a New Lynn house, and the prices are different and what you get is different, so things might not look the same. But if you choose 2 or 3 suburbs or 4 suburbs that are neighboring each other and you focus on those and you learn selling prices in those suburbs, there is no reason that you will pay too much for a house. And finally, fear number 4, possibly one of the biggest fears that buyers have, especially first home buyers, and especially I notice with people who come from different countries to New Zealand. And that fear is the fear of working with salespeople. And the fear comes from probably the suspicion, the fear that if I work with a salesperson, they will push me and I'll end up buying the wrong house and I will end up paying too much and they will push me to buy something that I don't want. There are a few things to point out with this. The first one is this one. Legally, a salesperson, a real estate salesperson cannot push you to buy a house. Before signing a sales and purchase agreement, a salesperson must recommend that you seek legal advice before signing the document. And so it gives you that period of time that you need to search the advice if you feel that you need to. Obviously, if you feel comfortable and you have done your research and you're willing to go ahead, then that is a different story. But we must, as salespeople, advise you to seek legal advice before signing a sales and purchase agreement. And it is something that you should do, especially when you're buying your first home. So a salesperson cannot push you. A salesperson's job is to work with you to find you a house. And if we go back to all the other points, if you've done your research about properties, you've done your research about prices and about suburbs, you would know what you are doing and nobody can push you, nobody can force you to sign a sales and purchase agreement. So covering those 4 fears, I hope that this will help you to calm down a little bit, be more courageous, more confident, probably is the right word, when it comes to purchasing a house. And if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call or send me an email. I'm always happy to chat and see if I can help.